Welcome to Auto Sausage, where we grind bits of automotive awesomeness into a brief but satisfying podcast about cars. So on today's show, we're going to cover Jerry Seinfeld's new car, Jay Leno's next car, speculating here, Paris auctions that are coming up, and a Yugo. As I mentioned before, you can find all of this information with appropriate links at the Auto Sausage tab at www.learnfromothers.org. So let's talk about Seinfeld's new car. Actually, Seinfeld bought two cars, and if you're a fan of Spike's Car Radio like I am, you got to hear from Seinfeld himself on this week's most recent episode. Just as a watch out, Spike's Car Radio is really good. They don't always talk about cars, and when they do, it's usually all about Porsches. Every once in a while, you will have an episode where it's about the comedian they're interviewing, because Spike has a history of writing for Seinfeld, writing for David Letterman. They're very smart guys, seem like very nice guys, a lot of cursing going on. But just an FYI, on this week's show, they talked about Jerry's two cars he bought. Ironically, they were both Porsche 944s. So the first one he bought on Bring a Trailer, and he bought it for $38,000. It's a 1990 Porsche 944 S2 Cabriolet, so a little convertible. Really nice car. So obviously right then and there, I had to Google it. I had to go and Bring a Trailer, find the most recent one, and you could see his Bring a Trailer handle, which is his username, which was 917K. I don't know exactly what that means, but 917, that's obviously one of the most iconic Porsches ever, and I believe he owns one of them. I'm not sure about the K. I'm sure it's something obvious, and I just can't think of what it is. But now that everybody knows what his Bring a Trailer handle is, if you read through the comments, it's pretty funny how they found out about him. You can see his bidding history on a Subaru Brat, I believe, that he did not win previously. So they joked about that on Spike's Car Radio, how he has to change his Bring a Trailer handle now going forward, which totally makes the most sense. So I'm wondering what that would be. I just kind of joking, maybe no hugs, because apparently he doesn't like hugs from strangers or even his best friend. Just a nice hearty handshake. The other car he purchased was a 1989 Porsche 944 Turbo. Now what's really funny about this is on the show this week, they asked him his impressions of both, and he really did not like the Cabriolet, which is why it's for sale currently. Right after he bought it, put it back up for sale. And he really loved the Porsche Turbo, the 944 Turbo. So for the Cabriolet, it's supposed to be listed at South Bay in California, but it is not on their website. So my assumption is that it sold prior to even being listed. That would make a lot of sense. You know, you want to buy Seinfeld's car. And I'm really curious of what they were asking for it. I'm going to check back and see if it's listed later this week. The other car, the 1989, and I have links for these on the show notes page on the website, has a picture of him buying it from the owner. And he said as soon as he drove it 20 feet or so, he knew that he had a great purchase. Just the way it drove, the way the turbo kicked in, all the differences between the regular 944 and the turbo, all the upgrades that Porsche had put into that. He even made the shocking statement that the 944 Turbo for 1989 was better than the 911 of the same year, which is crazy because that's when they had the 930 turbos that were known as the Widowmaker, because they were quite a handful once that turbo kicked in. Also, the 1987 to 89 Porsche 930 Turbos, that's one of the iconic cars that I would love to have, because that's back from my high school days, which is really cool. Don't feel hard for Jerry that he had to flip a car. If you haven't kept up with him, he's obviously a huge Porsche collector. He sold I think it was 18 Porsches at Amelia Island back in 2016, and those 18 Porsches sold for over $22 million. So he has plenty of cash in which to throw around to buy a $38,000 944 that he did not like. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So the Turbo is one new car, because obviously the other one's already on a dealer's lot and has probably already been sold. Well, next we move on to Jay Leno's next car. So Jay's always buying cars. And one thing, if you've ever watched his Sunday night YouTube channel, is if you go through all the different videos he's done over the years, he's a huge McLaren fan. He actually stated in one of these videos that McLaren is his favorite car company. And in one of those said McLaren videos, he also stated that he is in the More Money Than Brains Club. So if you go through his history of what he has owned, he owned what I call the pre-McLaren McLaren. It's this little two-seater car called the Rocket, and if you go back and search for it, you'll see it. And Gordon Murray, who designed the McLaren F1, actually designed the Rocket before McLaren. So you kind of go in succession. I won't get the dates right here, but after the Rocket, became the iconic McLaren F1 that Jay bought new. Crazy facts about that. I think the computer that you have to run the car costs like $38,000 and it's totally out of date now. Some other interesting things he has, he got the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren, which is a joint effort between McLaren and Mercedes-Benz. Apparently he got the very first one in the United States. There's a cool video where he runs his McLaren F1 engine without the exhaust on, which is really loud. There's a video where he removes the McLaren F1 engine to kind of show what it looks like outside of the car. And then they revisit the McLaren once it's put back together. And then he bought brand new, it might have been the first one again in the US, the McLaren, worst name ever, MP4-12C. And then his most recent purchase was the 2015 McLaren P1, which is the hypercar that is a hybrid. And you can even see videos of him getting it wrapped. So needless to say, Jay's a huge McLaren fan. So all that being said, what might be his next car? Well, obviously it would be a McLaren. And if you check the most recent issue of Automobile, I believe it's the February 2019 issue, they debut the McLaren Speedtail. So that's the car. I think it will be Jay's next car. Now, Jay has a wealth of money. Even with a price tag of $3.2 million, I would think he'd have to think twice about it. So he just bought the Ford GT, which was a $700,000 purchase. Is he going to buy the McLaren Speedtail is my question. Now, this is an interesting car. They don't want it to be known as the sequel to the F1, but it does have 3 seats, just like the F1, where the driver sits in the center. It's a really beautiful car. It's got some weird wheels. The front wheels are covered. They don't look like the back wheels, which are spoked. And that's all for aerodynamic purposes. The side view mirrors are not actually side view mirrors. They're actually video cameras. And they go flush to the body panels when not in use, which is really cool. So check out the Automobile article. A lot of really cool stuff. It's a great article with some great photographs. But that's the car I think Jay will buy next. But wait, there is another car I think Jay might be interested in buying that could possibly be his next car. I kind of doubt it, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. The same issue of Automobile magazine also highlights the 2018 Alpine A110. Now, if you're not familiar with this car, and I must admit I'm not that familiar with this car, it's a French car. And the original ones, I believe it was in the 60s and the 70s, mid 70s, they were great rally cars. They were French blue, had some integrated fog lights that were pretty cool, and they were very well known, very good looking, classy car. And Jay really likes French cars. So this is another one. The new one is not as good looking, but it's pretty quick, 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. It's not allowed in the US, but he could get a display and show certification, which basically means you can drive it, I believe it's less than 2,500 miles a year. In theory, you're only supposed to show it. So like I said, this new one is not as pretty as the old ones. It's decent. And the rear end kind of looks like the most recent Porsche 911, which is a compliment. That's the other one. So we will have to wait and see. If he throws us a curveball, I will be sure to mention it on a future podcast. So let's talk about the French auction scene. Actually, I misspoke earlier. There's 2 things I'd like to mention that are coming up. Retromobile, which occurs, I believe it's February 6th through the 10th. This is like a car show on steroids. So just be sure to check out the links in the podcast show notes to see more. But it's some crazy cool stuff occurring in Paris. A few of the call outs, some of the early French cars will be on display. They have a big motorcycle display, classic antique French motorcycles, which has got to be pretty cool. Some of the early Citroëns, they have 100 years that they're going to review. They also are showing, and I'm going to butcher this because I'm horrible at accents, Bedelia. So these were cars that were made in the early 1900s, French cars. But what's interesting, these were made by 2 guys that didn't have enough money to own a car. So they started making cars out of motorcycle parts and bicycles, I guess is lack of a better way. But they were really cool looking. They look like kind of like a coffin with wheels, with bicycle wheels, and they became very popular. So they actually went into business making around 3,000 of them, and 18 are known to exist, and 12 of them will be at Retromobile. So that will be really cool. And then they'll also have a huge motorcycle space. They will be celebrating 60 years of the Mini. So massive, incredible show. The other thing that's occurring at the show, which I'm actually a little bit more excited about, is the RM Sotheby's auction. So they always have a high-class catalog of cars, and I'm just going to run down a few of them here. They do have a F50 1996 F50 coming up for sale, expected to sell around, well, everything's listed in euros, 1.7 to 1.9 euros, which usually you multiply by 1.5 to get the dollar amount, so that's a lot of money. They have a 66 427 AC Cobra, and if you wanted to start a new Bugatti collection with some of the newer ones, they have all of them. They have the 1994 Bugatti EB110. Jay Leno just did a great spot on that on his YouTube channel, and it was actually the first time that he ever drove one. He bought the engine from one of these 25 years earlier and never put it into a car because he didn't know what to do with it, but he just said it was such an amazing piece of engineering, he had to buy it when it was available. Then beyond that, they have a couple Citroens, and they do have a Chiron, the newest Bugatti. So you can start your collection right there. And one thing that's kind of funny, I don't know if it's offensive or not, but instead of old timers, they have the young timers collection of cars from the 1980s. So apparently I'm a young timer because that's my wheelhouse there. A couple of the cool ones they have a wide body 1989 Mercedes 560 SEC AMG 6.0. That's a long title. They have a 1994 BMW Alpina B12, which is a really cool car. And they have some of the classics that are from the 80s that you would never think would be worth a lot of money right now. They have a 1983 BMW Alpina B9. If you're not familiar with Alpina, they took the BMWs and did additional stuff to them, such as making them a little bit more horsepower. They worked in the suspension, had typically a wheel package. They're pretty cool and they're pretty rare, especially the 80s versions. They have the car from Risky Business with Tom Cruise, not the actual car, but one like it, a 1992 Porsche 928 GTS. These are the front engine V8 rear wheel drive Porsches that are going up in value. This one is projected to sell between 70 and 85 euros, which is well over $100,000. And a couple of the other ones they have a 1987 BMW M6 projected between 60 and 80,000 euros. That sounds like a whole lot of money. And they have some high dollar cars in there as well. Quite a few well over the $1 million mark. They have a 2003 Ferrari Enzo, 2 million euros. One thing they have, which is interesting, they have a 1962 Aston Martin Lagonda Rapide. And that is the car that they brought back about 5 years ago to make a four-door Aston Martin. Gorgeous car, not very practical as a four-door, but the original, this 1962 one, is really, really cool looking. And I think one of the highest priced cars they have on here, 1956 Porsche 550 RS Spider. So this is the one that James Dean was killed in, not the exact one, but it's 4.3 million euros, so that's probably 6.5 or so million dollars. So check them all out. Everything will be on the website with links so you can see a little bit more detailed what I am talking about. And the last thing I'm going to mention is a Yugo. Yes, a Yugo. I just want to give a call out. The automobile magazine I mentioned earlier from February of 2019 has a really cool, very well written article about the Yugo, and the driver took it across Eastern Europe back to its home country, home city, in front of the manufacturing plant from where it was initially built. And I just thought it was a great article. And you know the old joke, a guy walks into a car dealership and he says, "I'd like to get a gas cap for my Yugo." And the guy behind the counter said, "That sounds like a fair trade." And if you're not familiar with Yugos, they were kind of the Eastern European version of the VW Rabbit, but horrendous quality control issues and all sorts of things. So a very entertaining and fun article to read. Once again, check everything we talked about at www.learnfromothers.org. Click on the Auto Sausage tab for everything we talked about. Check out the show notes for the links. And while you're there, check out my other podcast, Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success.